Hello everyone, welcome back to Insomnia Protocol. Tonight, we have another terrifying horror story for you. Before we start, please subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and leave a comment below. Now, get ready, and let's dive in. My friend and I were hired to watch a cabin in the Great Smoky Mountains, and we were given 7 rules to survive. The job listing did not say any of that, of course. It just said seasonal caretaker needed. Private property, month-long stay. Pay up front in cash, must be able to start immediately. I found it on a bulletin board outside a diner in Gatlinburg the same week my lease ran out and my hours at the hardware store got cut down to nothing. I called the number twice before anyone picked up. A woman with a thin, tired voice told me the cabin belonged to her family for 3 generations, and that they needed someone to keep an eye on it while the access road was being repaired, since the usual caretaker had quit without notice. She said the pay was more than fair for a month of work that mostly involved sitting around. She did not explain why the last caretaker left so suddenly, and I did not think to ask. I brought my friend Marcus along, because I did not want to spend a month alone in the mountains, and because he needed the money just as badly as I did. Marcus and I had been friends since high school, the kind of friendship where you do not have to explain yourself, you just show up. He worked construction most of the year, but things had been slow, and when I told him about the cabin job, he said he was in before I finished the sentence. We drove up on a Tuesday in early October, the leaves already starting to turn, the air getting that thin cold smell that only shows up in the mountains this time of year. The road wound higher and higher until the cell signal dropped to nothing, and the trees closed in so tight over the road that it felt like driving through a tunnel made of orange and red. Marcus kept the radio on until the static swallowed the last station. Then he just left it playing static, said it made the drive feel less lonely. The cabin sat at the end of a long gravel drive, tucked into a clearing with a creek running along the back edge of the property. It was bigger than I expected. 2 stories, dark wood, a wraparound porch with 1 bare bulb hanging above the front door. There was a woodshed off to the side, a trail camera mounted on a post near the tree line, and a root cellar door built into a small mound of earth near the back corner of the house. Everything about the place looked ordinary, the kind of cabin you would see in 100 rental listings, except for how quiet it was. No birds, no wind through the trees, just the sound of the creek somewhere behind the house. The owner met us there in person, an older man named Harold, who said he managed the property for his sister, the woman I had spoken to on the phone. He was polite but distracted, his eyes moving to the tree line every few seconds like he was checking for something. He walked us through the cabin quickly, showed us the 2 bedrooms upstairs, the kitchen, the fireplace, the desk in the front room with a small monitor hooked up to the trail camera outside. Then he sat us down at the kitchen table and set a laminated sheet of paper between us. He said before he could hand over the keys, we needed to understand the rules of the property. He said it in a tone that did not leave room for questions, the same tone a doctor uses when they are about to tell you something serious. Marcus laughed a little, asked if this was some kind of liability thing, insurance rules or something. Harold did not laugh back. He said these rules had kept every caretaker before us alive, and that the ones who broke them did not get a second chance to learn from their mistake. That got my attention. I asked what happened to the last caretaker, the one who quit without notice. Harold looked at the door for a moment, then back at me, and said the man did not quit. He said the man broke Rule 6 on his 3rd night, and that his sister found the cabin empty the following week with the back window shattered outward and the trail camera missing. He said the man was never found, and that the search parties who went looking for him came back saying the mountain had too many caves and drop-offs to search properly, and that they gave up after 2 weeks. Marcus went quiet after that. I felt my stomach turn over slow, the kind of feeling you get when you realize a joke was never a joke to begin with. I asked Harold if we could back out, if there was another option. He said we could leave right now if we wanted. No hard feelings. But the money was already wired to my account that morning, and he would need it back in full if we left. I checked my phone, no signal, no way to confirm anything, and I thought about my empty apartment lease and my empty bank account, and the fact that I had already told my landlord I was moving out. Marcus looked at me and said, "We came this far. We might as well hear the rules out." I think he was trying to be brave for both of us. I nodded, and Harold slid the laminated sheet across the table. The first rule was about the porch light. At sundown, we were supposed to turn it on and check the bulb every hour. And if it ever flickered 3 times in a row, we were never supposed to go outside to fix it. Harold said to lock the door immediately instead, because whatever was standing on the porch, when that happened, was trying to trick us into opening it ourselves. The second rule was about the fireplace. He said there was a stack of pre-cut hardwood on the left side of the hearth, and that was the only wood we were allowed to burn. If either of us ever brought in wet wood from the shed after dark, the other one needed to stop it immediately and check the hands of the other person for splinters, because he said no human skin splinters the way that wood does. The third rule was about the creek behind the cabin. He said after 11 at night we would hear someone splashing back there, calling out our names, asking for help. He told us never to answer, never to even look out the back window, because real people lost in these mountains never call out first names, not when they do not know you. The fourth rule was about the bedrooms. He said the cabin only had 2 beds, but if either of us woke up in the night and noticed a third indentation pressed into the rug on the floor between the rooms, we were supposed to stay under the blanket and not move, not even breathe loud, until the floorboards stopped creaking on their own. The fifth rule was about the trail camera outside. Every morning at sunrise, we were supposed to check the footage from the night before, and if the video ever showed a shape standing outside the bedroom window staring in, while we slept, we were supposed to delete the file right away and never bring it up to each other. The sixth rule was the one that made the voice of Harold drop lower than it had been the whole conversation. He said if one of us ever broke any of the other rules, we might notice the other person start speaking in a flat, empty voice while staring at nothing, at a wall or a corner of the room. He said if that happened, we were never supposed to look them in the eyes. Instead, we needed to tie a rope around their left ankle, lock ourselves in the root cellar out back, and wait until sunlight touched the ridgeline above the trees. The seventh rule was the last one on the page, and Harold said it twice to make sure we understood it. If someone ever knocked on the front door, using the voice of our mother or the voice of our father, we were never supposed to reach for our phones to call for help. Instead, we needed to grab the iron fire poker by the hearth, break the back window, and run straight down the mountain trail without stopping, even if the other person screamed our name behind us begging us to turn around. Marcus asked what would happen if we just ignored all of it and left tonight. Harold said that was always an option, but the money would need to be returned, and the road down the mountain took almost 4 hours in the dark, with no cell signal the whole way. He said most people who tried to leave at night never made it past the 2nd mile marker before they turned back around on their own, and he said it without any explanation of what that meant. I looked at Marcus, and Marcus looked at me, and neither of us said anything for a long moment. Then he picked up the laminated sheet, folded it once, and put it in his jacket pocket like that settled it. Harold stood up, said the first supply drop would come in 2 weeks, shook both our hands, and left before either of us could ask another question. We stood on the porch and watched his truck disappear down the gravel drive, the dust hanging in the cold air long after the sound of the engine faded into the trees. That night, right after the sun dropped behind the ridge, I walked out onto the porch and switched on the single bulb above the door, and I stood there for a long time watching it, waiting to see if it would ever flicker. The bulb held steady that first hour, a plain yellow glow that barely reached the edge of the porch steps. I went back inside once the cold got into my jacket, and I found Marcus in the kitchen going through the cabinets, taking stock of what supplies Harold had left us: canned food, bottled water, a case of batteries, a first aid kit, enough to last a couple weeks without needing much from town. He held up a can of soup and said, "At least they were not planning on starving us." And I laughed because it felt better than saying nothing. We spent the rest of that evening setting up our rooms upstairs, unpacking bags, figuring out which side of the hallway would be mine and which would be his. The bedrooms sat across from each other, with a narrow strip of hallway between them, a rug laid out flat on the wood floor, right in the middle. I remember looking at that rug for a second longer than I needed to, thinking about Rule 4, then telling myself I was being ridiculous on the first night before anything had even happened. Around 9, we sat by the fireplace, using the wood from the left side of the hearth just like Harold said, and the fire caught fast and burned clean, no smoke curling back into the room, no strange smell. Marcus asked me if I actually believed any of what Harold told us, or if I thought the guy was just messing with two strangers to keep them cautious and quiet about the property. I told him I did not know, but that 4 hours of dark road with no signal was a good enough reason to at least follow the rules for one night and see what happened. He nodded, poked at the fire with the iron rod from beside the hearth, and said the story about the last caretaker felt too specific to be made up on the spot, that people who lie usually keep things vague, not exact numbers like 3 nights and 2 weeks of searching. I had not thought about it that way, but once he said it, I could not stop thinking about it either. We checked the porch light again around 10, and it was still steady, still just a plain yellow bulb doing nothing but hanging there in the cold. I remember feeling almost disappointed, like some part of me wanted proof one way or another instead of sitting in this uncertain place between believing and not believing. At 11, right as Harold said it would, we heard the splashing. It came from behind the cabin, past the kitchen window, down where the creek cut along the tree line. At first it sounded like nothing more than water moving over rocks, the kind of sound you would expect from any creek at night. Then a voice came through it, thin and far away, calling out my name. Not Marcus. Mine, clear enough that I stood up straight without meaning to. Marcus grabbed my arm before I could take a step toward the back window. He said, "Do not," just like that, flat and fast, and I realized I had already started moving without deciding to. We stood there together in the kitchen, both of us staring at the window with the curtain drawn, listening to that voice keep calling my name, asking for help, saying it was cold, saying it was hurt, saying it needed someone to come look. I want to say I felt afraid, and I did, but underneath the fear there was something else, a pull, like my body wanted to answer even while my mind knew better. Marcus must have felt something similar, because his grip on my arm did not loosen the whole time. The voice went on for almost 10 minutes, sometimes closer, sometimes farther, like whatever it belonged to was pacing back and forth along the creek bed waiting for one of us to look. Then it stopped all at once, the way a radio cuts off mid-song. The kitchen went quiet except for the fire crackling in the other room. Marcus finally let go of my arm, and we both just stood there for a minute, neither one of us saying anything, both of us breathing harder than we should have been for standing still. He asked me if I still thought Harold made it up. I did not answer him. I did not need to. We did not sleep much that first night. We ended up dragging the couch cushions into the front room and staying near the fire, both of us too wound up to go upstairs to separate rooms just yet. Marcus fell asleep first, sometime after 1 in the morning, his breathing slow and even, and I lay there watching the firelight move across the ceiling, listening for anything else the cabin might decide to show us. Around 3, I heard footsteps upstairs. They were slow and deliberate, moving from one end of the hallway to the other, right along where that rug was laid out flat between our bedroom doors. I froze on the cushions, staring up at the ceiling like I could somehow see through it. The footsteps stopped directly above us, right where the stairs led out into the hallway. And then nothing, no more sound. No creak, no shift of weight, just silence stretching out so long I started to wonder if I had imagined it. I did not wake Marcus. I do not know why. Maybe I did not want to admit out loud that I had heard something, like saying it would make it more real than it already was. I stayed on those cushions until the gray light of morning came through the curtains, and only then did I finally let myself close my eyes. We woke up a little after 8, both of us stiff from the couch cushions, both of us pretending like the night before had gone better than it actually did. Marcus made coffee on the stove since the cabin had no working outlet in the kitchen, and I went to check the trail camera monitor on the desk. Like Rule 5 said to sunrise sharp, no delays. The screen took a second to load the overnight footage. Most of it was nothing, branches moving in the wind, a raccoon crossing the yard around midnight, the porch light glowing steady in the corner of the frame. I almost closed the file right there, ready to tell Marcus we got lucky. Nothing to worry about. Then the timestamp hit 2:57 in the morning, and the camera picked up a shape standing at the edge of the tree line, facing the house, facing directly at the window of my bedroom upstairs. It did not move for almost 6 minutes straight. It was tall, taller than made sense for a person, thin in a way that looked wrong even through the grainy black and white footage. And I could not make out a face, only a pale blur where a face should have been, tilted slightly upward toward the glass like it was studying something behind the curtain. I sat there staring at it, my coffee going cold in my hand, remembering what Harold said about deleting the file right away and never bringing it up to each other. I looked over my shoulder to make sure Marcus was still in the kitchen, still pouring his coffee, still humming some tune under his breath like it was any other morning. My finger hovered over the delete button for a long moment before I finally pressed it. The days that followed settled into something close to a routine, the kind that made it easy to forget how strange the first night had been. We split chores without really talking about it. Marcus handled the woodpile and the generator out back. I handled the kitchen and the trail camera. And every evening around 5 we sat on the porch and watched the light change over the ridge before the sun dropped low enough to remind us it was time to lock the door. We stopped talking about the voice from the creek after the second day. Not because we forgot it, but because saying it out loud made it feel bigger than it already was, and neither of us wanted to give it more room in our heads than it needed. Marcus started humming while he worked, said it helped keep his mind on something simple. And I found myself doing the same thing without noticing. Some old song from high school neither of us could remember the words to anymore. On the 4th night, I woke up around 2 in the morning to the sound of the front door handle turning. I lay there in the dark listening to it, the soft metallic click of someone testing the lock from the outside, slow and careful, like whoever it was did not want to make noise. My first thought was Marcus, that maybe he had gone downstairs for water and locked himself out somehow. But when I reached across the hallway and pushed his door open a crack, I saw him still asleep in his bed, blanket pulled up to his shoulder, chest rising and falling steady. I went back to my room and sat on the edge of the bed, listening. The handle kept turning, back and forth, patient in a way that made my skin crawl more than if it had been rushed or violent. Then it stopped, and I heard footsteps move off the porch, down the steps, and across the gravel toward the tree line, until the sound faded out completely. I did not sleep the rest of that night. When morning came, I told Marcus about it over coffee, and he went quiet for a long moment before saying he heard something too, but he thought it was a dream, footsteps circling the outside of the cabin sometime before dawn. We checked the trail camera together that morning instead of me checking it alone like the rules said, both of us needing to see it firsthand this time. The footage showed nothing standing at the door, no shape moving across the yard, just an empty porch with the bulb glowing steady above it the whole night through. Marcus said maybe whatever it was knew where the camera could see and stayed out of frame on purpose. I did not like that idea because it meant something out there was not just reacting, it was thinking, planning, working around the rules we had been given like it already understood them better than we did. That afternoon, while I was inside sorting through the pantry, Marcus went out to the woodshed to bring in more logs for the evening fire. I heard him out there for a while, the sound of wood being stacked, footsteps moving back and forth across the yard. When he came in, his arms were full, and I noticed right away the wood looked different from what we had been burning, darker along the edges, heavier looking, like it had been sitting somewhere damp for a long time. I asked him where he got it, and he said the woodshed, same as always, that the stack on the left side must have run low, so he grabbed from the pile on the right instead. My stomach dropped remembering Rule 2, the one about the pre-cut hardwood on the left side of the hearth, the one about wet wood brought in after dark, except it was not dark yet. The sun was still up, still a couple hours from setting behind the ridge. I told him to put it back, that we needed to stick to the left side no matter what, and he laughed a little, said I was taking Harold too seriously, that it was just wood, that the rule probably only mattered after sundown anyway. He set it down near the hearth despite what I said, told me he would sort it out later, and went back outside to check on something with the generator. I stood there staring at that pile of wood for a long time after he left, remembering the second half of Rule 2, the part about checking his hands for splinters. When he came back inside a few minutes later, I asked to see his palms, told him I was worried about the woodshed door having a rough latch that might have caught his skin. He held them out without much thought, and I checked them close, turning his hands over in the fading light from the window. No splinters, nothing but a little dirt and the calluses he already had from years of construction work. I felt my shoulders drop with relief, more relief than I expected to feel, and Marcus asked if I was doing okay, said I had been jumpy the last couple days. I told him I was fine, that the rules were just getting into my head more than I wanted to admit. We ended up burning the wood from the left side that night anyway, just to be safe, and Marcus did not argue about it, even though he still thought I was overreacting. I carried the wet wood back out to the shed myself before the sun went down completely, stacking it far from the pile we were supposed to use, telling myself it was just wood, just wood, just wood, the whole walk back to the cabin. That night, after we locked the door and checked the porch light for the third time, Marcus brought up something he had been thinking about all day. He said if the rules were real, if everything Harold told us was true, then someone had to have written them. Someone had to have learned all of this the hard way before us. He wondered out loud how many caretakers came through this cabin before we did, and how many of them made it through the full month without breaking a single rule. I did not have an answer for him. I thought about the man who broke Rule 6 on his third night, the one whose body was never found, and I wondered how close we had already come to becoming another name on a list neither of us had ever seen. Marcus must have been thinking something similar, because he stayed quiet after that, staring into the fire, the orange light moving across his face in slow shifting patterns. Around midnight, just as we were about to head up to our separate rooms for the first time since arriving, the porch light outside flickered. Once, then twice, then a pause long enough that I thought maybe it had stopped. Maybe I had only imagined the first two. Then it flickered a third time, and the whole cabin went still around us, like even the fire in the hearth had gone quiet waiting to see what we would do next. Marcus grabbed the deadbolt before I could even open my mouth, and we stood there together in the dark front room, listening to the porch outside go silent, both of us waiting to hear footsteps, waiting to hear anything at all. But there was nothing, just the sound of our own breathing and the low crackle of the dying fire behind us. We stood there so long after the deadbolt clicked that my legs started to ache from staying still. The fire had burned down to a low orange glow, barely enough to see Marcus across the room, but neither of us moved to add another log. I kept waiting for a knock, for the handle to turn again like it had the night before, for anything to explain why the light had flickered 3 times exactly the way Harold said it would. Nothing came. No footsteps, no voice, no sound from the porch at all. After a while, Marcus let out a breath he must have been holding and said maybe it was just the bulb going bad, old wiring. Something ordinary that had nothing to do with any of this. I wanted to believe him. I told him I wanted to believe him, and he said that was not the same thing. And for the first time since we arrived, I heard something close to fear in his voice, instead of just tiredness. We agreed to sleep in the front room again that night, cushions pulled close to the dying fire, both of us too unsettled to go back to separate bedrooms. I woke twice before dawn, once to the sound of wind pushing against the windows, and once to nothing at all, just a feeling that pulled me out of sleep with my heart already pounding before I even opened my eyes. Both times I checked on Marcus first, and both times he was right there beside me, asleep, breathing slow, nothing wrong. Morning came gray and overcast, clouds pressing low over the ridge, the kind of sky that made the whole property feel smaller somehow, closer, like the mountains had pulled in tight around the cabin overnight. I checked the trail camera the moment I was up, coffee forgotten on the counter, needing to know before anything else what the night had actually shown. The footage from the porch camera showed the flicker Harold warned us about, 3 clean pulses of darkness across the frame, time-stamped a few minutes before midnight, matching exactly what we had seen with our own eyes. After that, the porch stayed lit and empty for the rest of the night. No shape, no movement, nothing standing at the edge of the light waiting to be let in. I felt some of the tightness in my chest ease, at least until I checked the second camera angle, covering the side of the house near the woodshed. At 2:19 in the morning, the footage showed the woodshed door standing wide open. Though neither of us had gone out there after dark, the frame held steady on that open door for almost 4 full minutes, nothing moving in or out, just a black rectangle against the side of the shed like something had been standing just inside it the whole time, watching the house. I called Marcus over to look, and he stared at the screen for a long time without saying anything. He asked if maybe the latch was faulty, if wind could have knocked it open on its own. And I told him that made sense except there had been no wind strong enough that night to do something like that, not according to what either of us remembered feeling through the walls. He did not argue the point further. I think some part of him already knew the same thing I did, that the explanations we kept reaching for were starting to run out. We spent that morning walking the perimeter of the property together, checking the woodshed door up, close, checking the latch, checking the ground outside for footprints or drag marks or anything that might explain what the camera caught. The dirt near the shed was undisturbed, except for our own boot prints from the day before. No other tracks leading in or out, nothing broken, nothing torn or forced. The door itself latched fine when we tested it, clicking shut with a solid sound that did not seem like it would come open on its own from wind or weather. Marcus crouched down near the base of the door and pointed out something small pressed into the dirt. Just inside the frame, a shallow indentation about the size of a large hand. But wrong somehow, the fingers too long, spaced too far apart to belong to any person either of us had ever seen. Neither of us said anything about it out loud. We just looked at it for a while. Then Marcus stood up, brushed his hands off on his jeans, and said we should probably head back inside. That afternoon I found myself thinking again about the caretaker who broke Rule 6, the one who disappeared without a trace after his 3rd night. I asked Marcus if he thought Harold had told us everything, or if there were things about this place that even Harold himself did not fully understand. Marcus said he had been wondering the same thing, that a man who wrote 7 very specific rules probably learned them from watching someone else break them first, which meant somewhere out there, maybe further up the mountain, maybe buried in these woods, there were people who had not made it through their own version of this same test. We did not talk much for the rest of the day after that. I spent the afternoon reorganizing the pantry again, mostly just to keep my hands busy, and Marcus went through the supply crate Harold left behind, checking flashlights, batteries, the first aid kit, making sure everything still worked in case we needed it fast. Around 4, he called me over to the desk, said he found something tucked into the bottom of the crate underneath the extra batteries. A small spiral notebook with a cracked leather cover, worn soft at the edges like it had been carried around for a long time. Neither of us remembered seeing it during the first supply check. Marcus opened it slow, careful, like it might fall apart in his hands, and the first page held a single line of handwriting, cramped and uneven, nothing like the neat printed rules on Harold laminated sheet. It read, "If you found this, you already know more than they told you," and underneath that, a second line in the same shaky hand, "Do not trust the 7th rule the way they explained it to you." I looked at Marcus and he looked at me, both of us holding that little notebook between us like it might burn if we let go too fast. Outside, the afternoon light was already starting to fade behind the ridge, and somewhere past the tree line. Faint but unmistakable, I heard the first splash of water hitting rock down at the creek, hours earlier than it was supposed to start. I closed the curtains faster than I meant to, my hand shaking a little as I pulled the fabric tight against the frame. Marcus was still holding the notebook, staring down at that second line like he could will it to explain itself if he read it enough times. Do not trust the 7th rule the way they explained it to you. Neither of us said anything for a moment, the splashing sound outside continuing steady, hours early, wrong in a way that made my skin crawl worse than the actual sound itself. Marcus flipped to the next page, and the handwriting continued, less steady than the first entry, like whoever wrote it had been in a hurry or scared, or both. It talked about someone named Daniel, said Daniel had been the caretaker before, said Daniel followed every rule perfect for 2 full weeks before something changed. The writing described how Daniel started sleeping less, eating less, spending long stretches standing at the back window, staring at the tree line even during the day, when nothing was supposed to be watching. The next few pages were harder to read, the handwriting getting smaller, tighter. Words crammed into the margins like the writer had run low on paper and did not want to waste any of it. One line stood out clear among the rest, written larger than everything around it. The 7th rule is not about your parents' voice at the door. It is about which one of you starts believing the voice belongs to something real. Marcus read that line out loud twice, slow, like he needed to hear it a second time to understand what it meant. I asked him what he thought it meant, and he said maybe the door knock was never the real danger. Maybe the real danger was what happened after, the fear, the panic, the way people reacted once they heard something wearing a voice they loved. He said maybe Harold left something out, some detail the rule sheet never explained, and that detail was sitting right here in this notebook the whole time, hidden at the bottom of a supply crate neither of us thought to search through properly. The splashing outside kept going, steady, patient. No voice calling out yet, just water moving against rock in a rhythm too even to be natural. I checked the clock on the wall. Barely 6 in the evening, the sun still visible above the ridge line, hours before 11 when the sound was supposed to start according to Rule 3. Marcus noticed it too. He said maybe the rules were not fixed the way we assumed. Maybe they only described the earliest something could happen, not the latest. And if that was true, then every rule Harold gave us might have a hidden edge to it, some part left unsaid that we would only discover the hard way. We sat together at the kitchen table for the next hour, going through the rest of the notebook page by page, looking for anything else Daniel might have written down before whatever happened to him happened. Most of the later pages were fragments, half sentences, single words, repeated over and over like someone losing the thread of their own thoughts. One page just had the word ankle written 17 times down the length of the paper, each one slightly more crooked than the last. Near the very back, one final entry stood apart from the rest. written in a different pen, darker ink, steadier hand, like it had been added at a different time than everything before it. It read, "If the third indentation appears on the rug, and you are the one still standing, check the ankle of whoever is sleeping before you decide who broke the rule." Marcus set the notebook down on the table and rubbed his hands over his face. He asked me what that could possibly mean, and I told him I thought it meant the entity behind all of this did not just mimic voices or knock on doors. It might be able to take someone's place entirely, walk around wearing them like a coat while the real person was somewhere else, maybe still alive, maybe not, and the ankle detail from Rule 6 was not just a way to restrain someone dangerous. It was a way to check if the person tied to that rope was actually who they appeared to be. I do not know where that idea came from exactly, but once I said it out loud, it felt true in a way that scared me more than anything Harold had told us at the kitchen table on our first day. Marcus went quiet again, staring at the fire, and I could see him running through the last few days in his head, checking his own memory against every moment we had spent apart from each other since arriving. Outside, the splashing sound finally stopped, cutting off mid-rhythm the same way it had the first night. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, like the whole property was holding its breath along with us. Marcus stood up and walked to the window, peeking through a gap in the curtain despite everything the rules told us not to do. I told him to stop, and he did, stepping back fast like he had caught himself doing something he already regretted. He said he thought he saw something standing at the tree line, just for a second, tall and pale, gone the moment he blinked. I asked him if it looked like the shape from the trail camera footage days earlier, and he said he could not be sure, that it had only been there for a heartbeat before the shadows swallowed it back up. We spent the rest of that evening close to the fire, the notebook sitting between us on the table, neither of us willing to put it away or read it again either. Around 10, Marcus finally spoke, his voice quieter than usual, and said he wanted to make an agreement between us, something beyond the 7 rules Harold gave us. He said from now on, whenever one of us woke the other up in the middle of the night, we needed to say something only the 2 of us would know, some memory from before this trip, something no notebook or entity in these woods could possibly guess. I agreed without hesitation. We spent the next few minutes picking something specific, a memory from a camping trip we took together back in high school, a detail small enough that nobody else would ever think to fake it. We repeated it back and forth to each other twice, making sure we both had it memorized exactly the same way. Then we banked the fire low, checked the porch light one more time, steady and unbroken, and climbed the stairs together for the first time since arriving, walking side by side past the rug laid out flat in the hallway between our rooms, both of us careful not to look down at it too long. I woke somewhere close to 3 in the morning to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. I lay still for a second, heart hammering, before I remembered the agreement Marcus and I made downstairs. I whispered his name into the dark, and a shape stepped into the doorway, tall against the dim hallway light bleeding in from the window at the far end. I asked for the memory. My voice came out thinner than I wanted it to. The shape in the doorway did not answer right away, and that pause stretched out long enough that I felt my whole body go cold, every hair on my arms standing up at once. Then Marcus' voice came through, flat, saying he could not remember, saying his head felt foggy, saying he just wanted to check if I was okay. I did not move. I told him to say the memory or leave the doorway, and I kept my eyes on the shape the whole time, refusing to look away even though every instinct told me to pull the blanket over my head and disappear. He took a step closer, and I saw his face catch a little light from the hallway. His eyes wrong somehow, too wide, too still, like he was staring at something behind me instead of at me directly. I grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand and clicked it on, aiming it straight at him. For a second his face looked completely normal, just Marcus, tired and confused, blinking against the sudden brightness. He asked why I was pointing a light at him. said he only came to check because he heard me talking in my sleep. I asked again for the memory, the camping trip detail, the one only the two of us would know. This time he said it, stumbling a little over the words, but getting it right, the exact detail about the raccoon that got into our cooler the summer after junior year, the way we laughed about it for the rest of that trip. My shoulders dropped with relief so sudden it almost hurt. I apologized for scaring him, said I had gotten spooked reading that notebook, and he said he understood, that the whole thing had gotten into his head too. We sat together on the edge of my bed for a while after that, both of us too rattled to go back to sleep separately. Marcus said he did not actually remember coming into my room, that the last thing he remembered clearly was closing his eyes downstairs after we agreed on the memory test, and the next thing he knew he was standing in my doorway with no memory of getting up, walking the hallway, or opening my door. That should have scared me more than it did, but exhaustion had worn both of us down enough that neither of us pushed the thought any further that night. We ended up falling asleep sitting up against the headboard, shoulder to shoulder, the flashlight still burning on the nightstand until the batteries gave out sometime before dawn. Morning brought another gray sky, thick clouds pressing low enough that the ridgeline disappeared into the mist above the tree line. I checked the trail camera first thing, hands still a little unsteady from the night before. The footage showed nothing standing outside the windows, no shapes at the tree line, nothing unusual at all except for one detail that took me a moment to notice. The timestamp on the overnight recording jumped. One clip ended at 2:51 in the morning, and the next began at 3:12, a full 21 minutes missing from the file with no explanation for the gap. I called Marcus over to look, and he stared at the timestamps for a long time before saying maybe the camera glitched, maybe the battery died and reset itself, maybe there was some ordinary explanation neither of us could think of standing here half awake with too much coffee and too little sleep. I wanted to believe him. I really did, but the missing 21 minutes lined up almost exactly with the time I remembered him standing in my doorway, unable to answer a simple question about a shared memory, staring at me with eyes that did not look entirely like his own. I did not say that part out loud. I told myself there was no proof either way, that jumping to conclusions would only make things worse between us when we needed to trust each other more than ever to get through the rest of this month. Marcus seemed to sense something was still bothering me though, because around noon he pulled me aside and asked if I actually believed the version of events he gave me about last night. I told him I wanted to. He said that was not the same thing as believing it, echoing what he told me days earlier almost word for word, and something about hearing my own worry reflected back at me made it feel heavier, more real, like we were both circling the same fear, without either of us willing to say it plainly. We spent that afternoon rereading the notebook one more time, searching for anything Daniel might have written about missing time, about waking up somewhere without memory of walking there, about doubting the people closest to him. We found one more entry near the middle of the book we had somehow skipped over before, a short paragraph tucked between longer sections, easy to miss if you were not looking carefully. It said the entity did not need to replace a person entirely to cause harm. Sometimes it only needed to borrow a few minutes, here and there, walk someone's body around during a gap in their memory, plant a seed of doubt between two people who needed to trust each other completely to survive the month. The entry ended with a warning that felt aimed directly at us, sitting there at that same kitchen table. Reading it by the gray afternoon light. Do not let doubt do the entity work for it. That is exactly what it wants. Marcus read that line twice, then looked up at me, and for the first time since we arrived, I saw something steady in his expression instead of fear, something that looked almost like resolve. He said whatever was happening out here, we needed to decide right now that we trusted each other completely, rules and missing time, and everything else aside, because the moment we stopped trusting each other was probably the moment this place actually won. I agreed, and we shook on it like a couple of kids sealing a promise, both of us knowing how small that gesture was against everything we were facing, but needing it anyway. That evening, we checked the porch light together at every hour like the rule said, and for the first time since arriving, it stayed steady through the entire night without a single flicker. 4 days passed after that without a single incident. The porch light held steady every night. The creek stayed quiet after 11. No footsteps in the hallway, no third indentation on the rug, no shapes standing at the tree line when we checked the camera each morning. Marcus started to relax a little, said maybe we had turned some kind of corner, maybe whatever tested us those first few nights had decided we were not worth the trouble anymore. I did not feel the same relief he did. Something about the quiet felt wrong in a way I could not explain, like the stillness before a storm rolls in over the ridge, the air pressing down heavier the longer it holds. I kept the notebook closed during those quiet days, rereading Daniel entries whenever I had a spare moment, trying to piece together more of his story from the fragments he left behind. On the 5th quiet night, everything changed at once. We had gone to bed separately for the first time since the missing time incident, both of us finally comfortable enough to sleep in our own rooms again. I woke sometime after midnight to a sound I had not heard before. A low dragging noise coming from somewhere downstairs, slow and heavy, like something large being pulled across the wooden floor. I got up and checked Marcus' room first, careful, quiet, and found it empty, his bed still made from that morning. No sign he had gone to sleep there at all. My chest tightened as I made my way down the stairs, flashlight in hand, following the dragging sound toward the front room where the fireplace still glowed with the last embers of the evening fire. Marcus stood near the hearth, facing away from me, completely still except for his right arm, which kept dragging one of the fireplace logs back and forth across the floor in a slow, repetitive motion that made no sense at all. I called his name softly, remembering the memory test we agreed on, and he did not turn around right away, his arm still moving the log, that same dry scraping sound filling the quiet room. When he finally turned to face me, his expression was wrong in a way I had never seen on him before, slack and empty, his eyes fixed somewhere past my shoulder instead of on my face. I asked for the memory, my voice barely above a whisper, and he opened his mouth. But what came out was not words, just a low, flat tone that rose and fell without ever forming into anything I could understand. I remembered Rule 6 immediately, the flat, monotone voice, the instruction never to look them in the eyes. I forced myself to look down at the floor instead, my heart slamming against my ribs, and I saw it then, the third indentation Daniel warned about, pressed into the rug near the base of the stairs, deep and wide, far too large to belong to either of us. I grabbed the coil of rope from the supply crate with shaking hands, my eyes staying fixed on the floor the entire time, refusing to look up at whatever was standing across the room wearing my friend face. I approached slowly, keeping my voice steady even though nothing inside me felt steady at all, telling him it was going to be okay, that I just needed him to sit down for a moment. He did not resist when I looped the rope around his left ankle, his body oddly cooperative, almost limp, like whatever controlled him did not consider a bound ankle much of a threat. I tied it off tight, testing the knot twice, my hands numb with cold sweat despite the warmth still radiating from the dying fire behind him. The moment I finished, the flat tone coming from his throat cut off completely, replaced by silence so sudden it felt like a physical thing pressing against my ears. I backed away toward the kitchen, toward the root cellar door built into the floor near the pantry, never once looking up from the ground, my eyes tracking his feet in my peripheral vision the whole way. I pulled the cellar door open and climbed down the narrow wooden steps into the dark space below the kitchen, pulling the door shut above me and sliding the heavy iron bolt across it just like the rule said. The cellar smelled of damp earth and old stone, barely large enough to stand upright in. A single shelf along one wall lined with jars of preserves left over from whoever used this space before us. I sat on the cold dirt floor with my back against the stone wall, listening to the muffled sounds coming from above. Footsteps, slow and dragging, moving across the kitchen floor directly over my head. Then a voice, Marcus' voice, calling my name through the floorboards, asking why I left him tied up like that, asking why I did not trust him after everything we agreed to. The words wrapped in a tone that sounded almost hurt, almost human. I pressed my hands over my ears and stared at the small gap of gray moonlight leaking through a crack near the top of the cellar door, focusing everything I had on that thin sliver of outside light, waiting for it to change color, waiting for dawn. The voice above me continued for what felt like hours, shifting between pleading and anger, and something that almost sounded like crying near the end. I did not answer once. I kept my eyes on that crack of light, repeating the camping trip memory over and over in my head like a lifeline. The raccoon in the cooler, the two of us laughing until we could not breathe, holding on to that one real thing, while everything else in the cabin above me tried to convince me it belonged to the person I trusted most in the world. Sometime before sunrise, the dragging footsteps upstairs finally stopped. The voice went quiet. I stayed pressed against that stone wall a long while longer, unwilling to trust the silence just yet, watching that thin crack of moonlight until it slowly, painfully slowly, began to turn pale gray, then gold, the first true light of morning finally touching the ridge line above the trees. Only then did I slide the bolt back and push the cellar door open, climbing the narrow steps on legs that barely held my weight, ready to find out exactly what waited for me in the kitchen above. The kitchen looked ordinary in the pale gold light coming through the window, everything sitting exactly where it belonged. No sign of the dragging noise or the flat monotone voice from the night before. I stepped through slowly, my whole body tensed for something to jump out from around the corner. But the cabin stayed silent except for the tick of the cooling fireplace in the front room. I found Marcus lying near the hearth, still tied at the ankle, the rope stretched taut across the floor, where he must have shifted position sometime in the night. His eyes were closed, his chest rising and falling in slow, even breaths, and for one terrible second, I thought maybe I had misjudged everything. Maybe I had tied up my own friend for nothing, while whatever caused it walked free somewhere in these woods. I said his name from a safe distance, watching his face for any sign of that flat, empty look from before. His eyes opened slowly, confused, blinking against the morning light, and he asked why he was on the floor, why his ankle was tied with rope, why his whole body ached like he had been lying on hard wood for hours. I asked him for the memory before I moved any closer, my voice shaking despite everything I tried to do to steady it. He gave it back to me without hesitation, the raccoon, the cooler, the laughter that lasted the rest of that old camping trip, every detail correct. I untied the rope with hands that would not stop trembling, and the moment it came loose he sat up fast, rubbing his ankle, looking around the room like he was trying to piece together where he was and how he got there. He remembered almost nothing from the night before. The last clear memory he had was going up to his room after we said goodnight, climbing into bed, closing his eyes. Everything after that was blank, no dragging log, no flat voice, no memory of standing near the fireplace or being tied to the floor by the friend he trusted most in the world. I told him everything, the dragging sound that woke me, the log scraping across the floor, the third indentation pressed into the rug near the stairs, the voice that was not quite his voice pleading with me through the cellar door for hours afterward. He listened without interrupting, his face going paler with every detail, and when I finished he just sat there for a long moment staring at the rope still coiled on the floor beside him. He asked if I looked at the rug afterward, if the indentation was still there. I told him I had not checked yet, too afraid of what I might find, and together we walked over to the spot near the base of the stairs, where I remembered seeing it. The indentation was gone, the rug smooth and flat, like nothing had ever pressed into it at all. No trace left behind except the memory of it burned into my mind from the night before. We spent that morning mostly in silence, both of us processing what had happened in our own way. Marcus kept touching his ankle where the rope had been, like he needed the physical reminder to believe any of it was real. I made coffee we barely drank, and around midday he finally spoke again, asking the question that had clearly been sitting in his head since he woke up on that floor. He wanted to know what would have happened if I had looked him in the eyes instead of looking away. I told him I did not know, that I had not wanted to find out, that something about the wrongness of his expression made the choice easy even in the middle of all that fear. He nodded slowly, said he was grateful I followed the rule exactly, said he could not imagine what might have happened otherwise. We pulled the notebook out again that afternoon, searching for anything Daniel might have written about Rule 6 specifically, about what happened to the people who looked instead of looking away. We found a short passage near the end of the book we had somehow overlooked before, written in that same shaky, uneven hand from the earlier pages. It described someone Daniel called the second caretaker, a woman who came before him according to the notes, who broke Rule 6 on a night much like the one we had just survived. According to what Daniel wrote, her partner looked her directly in the eyes while she stood there speaking in that flat voice, and by morning there were 2 identical people standing in the cabin, both claiming to be the real one, both giving identical answers to every question asked of them, until the partner could no longer tell which version of her he had spoken to only days before. The entry ended there, no explanation of what happened after that, no resolution. Just the sentence trailing off mid-thought like Daniel himself had been too disturbed to finish writing it down. Marcus set the notebook aside and rubbed his face with both hands, said he did not know how much more of this he could take, said the not knowing was somehow worse than any of the specific horrors we had already faced. I understood exactly what he meant. Every rule Harold gave us protected against something, but every rule also hinted at something far worse waiting behind it, some deeper truth about this cabin and this mountain that neither of us fully understood yet. And every day we spent here seemed to peel back another layer of that truth, without ever showing us the whole picture underneath. That evening, as we prepared for another night of watching the porch light and listening for the creek, Marcus brought up something that had been sitting heavy in my own mind as well. He said we were now past the halfway point of the month, that if the pattern held, whatever waited for us in these mountains was only going to grow bolder as the days went on, testing us harder, finding new ways around the rules we thought protected us completely. I agreed, though I did not say out loud the thought that had been circling in my head since morning, the fear that Rule 6 might not be the worst thing we would face before this month was over. Rule 7 still sat unbroken and untested. The one about the knock on the door, the one about the voice of a mother or a father calling through the wood, and something about the way Daniel Note mentioned it, the warning that we should not trust the way it had been explained to us, made me dread the night that rule would finally come due more than anything else on that laminated sheet. The nights that followed stretched thin with a kind of waiting neither of us wanted to name out loud. We kept up every routine exactly as before, the porch light, the fireplace wood, the trail camera at sunrise, but every small sound made us both go rigid, every creak of the old wood floors sending us reaching for each other memory phrase before either of us said a word. On the 9th night since we arrived, a storm rolled in over the ridge sometime after dark, thunder rumbling low and constant through the mountains, rain hammering the roof hard enough to drown out most other sound. Marcus said storms were common this time of year, that we should not read anything more into it than bad weather, but I noticed he checked the deadbolt twice before we settled by the fire, and I noticed I did too. Around 10, a knock came at the front door. 3 slow raps, deliberate, spaced evenly apart, and then a voice came through the wood, muffled by the storm but unmistakable, calling out in a tone that struck something deep and old inside me before my mind even caught up to what I was hearing. It was my mother voice, exact in a way that made my chest seize up, The same warmth, the same worn softness at the edges she always had when she called my name from another room. She said she got lost driving up the mountain trying to find us. Said her car broke down somewhere near the main road. Said she was cold and scared and just needed someone to open the door for a minute. Every rational part of my brain screamed that this could not be real, that my mother lived 4 states away and had no reason to be anywhere near these mountains. But some older, more instinctive part of me was already halfway out of my chair before Marcus grabbed my wrist. He reminded me of the rule, his voice tight but steady, and together we backed away from the door toward the hearth, where the iron fire poker leaned against the stone. The voice outside shifted, less pleading now, more insistent, asking why I would leave my own mother standing in the cold and the rain, asking if I had forgotten everything she ever did for me, and even knowing what I knew, even holding on to the fire poker with both hands, some small broken part of me wanted to believe it anyway. Marcus grabbed my other hand and squeezed hard, grounding me, and together we moved toward the back window exactly like Rule 7 instructed, weapon ready, no time wasted reaching for phones that had no signal out here anyway. The knocking at the front door grew heavier, more insistent, the wood starting to groan under repeated impact that no ordinary knock should have caused. I swung the poker into the back window, and the glass shattered outward in a spray that caught the storm light in jagged pieces across the dark yard. Cold rain hit my face the moment I climbed through the broken frame, Marcus right behind me, both of us dropping onto the muddy ground outside, before scrambling up and starting down the mountain trail exactly as the rule demanded. No hesitation, no looking back toward the cabin we were leaving behind. We had gone maybe 30 yards down the trail, rain soaking through every layer of clothing, mud sucking at our boots with every step when I heard it behind us. My name screamed in Marcus' voice, desperate and terrified, begging me to turn around, saying something had grabbed him, saying he needed help right now before it dragged him back inside. Every instinct in my body wanted to stop, to turn, to go back for my friend no matter what any laminated rule sheet told me to do. I felt my feet slow down almost against my will, and it was only the memory of Daniel's notebook, the warning about the 7th rule not being what it seemed, that kept me moving forward instead of turning back toward that voice screaming through the storm behind me. I ran another 10 yards before something made me glance sideways instead of backward, and there beside me, matching my pace stride for stride through the driving rain, was Marcus, real Marcus, mud-streaked and soaked through just like me, his face a mask of confusion and fear as he heard the same screaming voice I did coming from somewhere behind us both. We looked at each other for one suspended second, both of us understanding at the same time exactly what that voice behind us actually was, and then we ran harder than either of us had ever run in our lives, down that dark mountain trail through sheets of freezing rain, the screaming behind us slowly fading into the storm until finally, mercifully, there was nothing left but thunder and our own ragged breathing and the sound of our boots pounding against wet earth. We ran until the trail leveled out enough to catch our breath, both of us collapsing against a wide tree trunk off to the side of the path, chests heaving, rain still coming down hard around us. Marcus asked between breaths what exactly we had just heard back there, and I told him the only thing that made sense, that whatever were his voice screaming for help had wanted exactly what almost happened, wanted me to turn back, wanted to separate us out here in the dark and cold, where anything might have been waiting. He nodded slowly, still catching his breath, and asked the question that had been building in both our minds since the knocking first started. He wanted to know what would have happened to whichever one of us actually turned around, actually went back toward that voice instead of running forward like the rule demanded. I did not have an answer for him, and somehow the not knowing felt worse than any answer could have been. We spent the rest of that night huddled together under a rock overcrop a little further down the trail, waiting for the storm to pass and the first gray light of dawn to give us enough visibility to figure out our next move. Neither of us said much. There was not much left to say after everything we had just survived. Only the shared understanding that whatever we did next, we needed to do it together, no matter what the rules told us to do or how convincing the voices calling us apart might sound. Dawn came slow and gray, the storm finally passing sometime before 6, leaving the trail slick with mud and the trees dripping steady around us. We had not slept, just sat huddled under that rock overcrop through the last hours of darkness, listening to the forest settle back into its ordinary quiet. No more screaming, no more voices, nothing but rain and wind and the distant sound of the creek somewhere far behind us now. We made our way down the mountain in the weak morning light, both of us moving slow and careful, still half expecting something to step out of the tree line at any moment. Neither of us talked about going back to the cabin. There was nothing left there worth returning for. Not our bags, not the notebook, not the money that had already been wired to my account weeks before any of this began. It took almost 3 hours of walking before we hit a stretch of road with enough elevation to catch a weak cell signal. Marcus' phone buzzed with a string of delayed messages the moment it connected, and mine did the same. Both of us finally able to call for help after nearly 2 weeks of silence. A ranger station picked us up along the main road an hour later, 2 exhausted, mud-covered strangers with a story neither of us knew how to tell without sounding like we had lost our minds somewhere up on that mountain. We told them a version of the truth, that we had been hired to caretake a property, that a storm knocked out power, and we got spooked enough to hike out rather than wait it out alone. The ranger who drove us down did not ask many follow-up questions, though I noticed the way his eyes flickered when I mentioned the cabin name and the property owner, like he recognized something in that combination he did not care to discuss with 2 strangers he had just found stumbling along a mountain road. We never heard from Harold again. I tried the number a few times over the following weeks, and it rang through to nothing every time. No voicemail, no automated message, just endless ringing until I finally stopped trying. Marcus looked up the property once we both had reliable internet again and found almost nothing. An old real estate listing from years earlier, no current owner information, no record of the family Harold claimed to represent. We never talked much about that final night on the trail, the voice that wore Marcus' scream, the choice I almost made to turn back toward it. Some things, I think, are better left folded away rather than picked apart too closely, at least for a while. What we did talk about, more than once over the months that followed, was how close we came to losing each other out there, not to whatever waited in those woods directly, but to the fear and doubt that thing tried so hard to plant between us at every turn. I still have the memory phrase we made up that first week, the raccoon and the cooler, and the laughter that lasted the rest of an old camping trip. Marcus and I say it to each other sometimes now, half joking, a private joke between 2 people who survived something together that neither of us can fully explain to anyone else. It means more to both of us than it probably should for something so small and silly, but I think that is exactly why it worked in the first place. I think about Daniel sometimes too, the caretaker before us who never made it home, whose handwriting filled that cracked leather notebook we left behind in the cabin along with everything else. I hope, in whatever way hope applies to someone I never actually met, that wherever he ended up, he found some kind of peace, or at least some kind of answer to the questions his notebook never finished asking. The mountains are still there, of course, the way mountains always are, indifferent and ancient and unbothered by anything that happens in their shadow. Somewhere up that same gravel drive, past the tree line and the creek and the ridge that swallows the sun each evening, that cabin is probably still standing, porch light hanging above the door, waiting for the next person desperate enough or unlucky enough to answer a job listing on a diner bulletin board. I do not know if there will be a next caretaker after us or if there was ever meant to be an end to this at all. What I do know is that Marcus and I made it out, together exactly the way we went in and some nights, when the wind picks up outside my apartment window in a certain way, I still find myself listening for the sound of water moving over rocks, waiting to see if it calls my name. It never has, not since we left those mountains behind. But I still listen anyway, every single time.